here, know you can watch it. And for those of you who are here, you can watch it again and again. I am so thrilled to have some really dear, close friends of mine, people who have been in my life, been through the journey of this book, honestly. So all of you have been a part of this process in a way that feels near and dear to me. So thank you all for being here. I will do a quick introduction. And as I do that, I really encourage everybody to put your name, where you're from in the chat, because this is such a community experience. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Let us know where you're coming from. We're not going to be doing Q&A because we have a lot to talk about in a short period of time. And the first thing I want to say is that there is a switch. If you've noticed, there are some new people here in this summit. Matthias Barker had a family issue come up for him, told me about it yesterday. So in the last moment, he's not able to be here, unfortunately, but so grateful to Janina Fisher and to Mastin Kipp, who in a moment's notice literally said, oh my goodness, Frank, I'd love to help you. So I just want to welcome both Janina Fisher and Mastin Kipp to our To Be Loved Summit. And many people probably already know, maybe not, but Nicole LePera is here with us today. Welcome, Nicole. And David Kessler is joining us today, and same with Sara Kuburic. So we have a beautiful group of people here. I'm honored and touched. You know, it's interesting, folks. It's one thing, we're all doers and givers in the world. And one of my biggest struggles is being the receiver. So I am just so full of love and gratitude to all of you for showing up for this. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for doing that. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about really, I'm going to give everybody some time to kind of share a little bit about their to be loved moments and the moments when maybe they weren't loved, right? The complexities of growing up in families is complicated. Every family is complicated, right? There's powerful positive moments, there's painful sorrow moments. Like nobody is free of either side, which was one of the things so important for me in writing this book. Like nothing is all anything. So we all have the range, and we're going to hear a little bit from everybody about their complexities and then the impact of relational trauma that it has on our lives growing up, and also on the way it affects our adult relationships. So, you know, we're going to be talking a little bit about that. I think I could speak for all of us in this word of resilience. Like there's this enormous capacity for resilience that I believe every one of us has. Like no matter where I travel, no matter where I go, I see trauma everywhere, and I see the resilience of the human spirit. And these are some highly resilient people in this room here with us today, for sure, as they've chosen their life's journey to help others heal from their trauma. So yeah, everybody's going to everybody's going to share a little bit of their to be loved journey. So why don't we start off with you, Nicole? Thank you so much. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And just say a little bit about your journey of to be loved or when you weren't.
Of course. And thank you, Frank, for having me. Much like you, it's funny, this idea of receiving love is so much a part of my own journey. And I think why from the moment I met your work, before we even became personal friends, I was just so resonant with your story and your journey. So when you then proposed that you were writing a memoir, I just thought it was so impactful. And I'm just so honored to be a part of it. And when I was thinking about love in my own life and thinking about kind of the opposite of feeling loved, quite honestly, I didn't have a difficulty thinking of moments, especially in my past, where I didn't feel loved. And if I really were to summarize, and this wasn't because I had an intact family, I had, two caregivers who were ever present, my mom physically present in care of me through the large majority of my childhood. I had found myself in romantic relationships quite early on. So it wasn't for lack of relationship, though for me, the highlighted moments in particular were around special occasions, namely my birthday. And what I would find was year after year, I would, in anticipation, right? Birthdays are supposed to be great, joyous events where people get around and tell you how much they love you and celebrate you. And I would have that expectation. And then I would have the birthday experience, whatever it would be, with my partner, with a small party, a small gathering of friends. And
Wow.
I would find myself in those moments feeling so disconnected,
Mhm.
feeling so unloved. And I describe it as really being alone in a crowded room, even though objectively, right here I am around people who did show up, who were in celebration, spending their time, their presence, even nice words of affirmation. And for me, I wasn't able to register, to receive. And of course, for a very long time, I thought that maybe there was something wrong with me, right? How can
Right,
I find
right,
myself in relationships with people who are begging almost to love me? And
yeah.
why am I struggling so deeply to be loved or to allow myself that experience of feeling the love? And ultimately, for me, it was really unpacking my earliest childhood experiences, the lack of
Mhm.
emotional connection. Flash forward in time when I then began to explore moments when now in present day, and of course, I would be lying if I said there weren't still moments where I feel that little girl alone in a crowded room, because I absolutely do. Though
Yeah.
now there are equal moments where I'm able to be present to the love and support. And interestingly, now the highlighted time period for me was not in a celebratory moment when I actually felt loved, that is. It was looking back around the kind of final stages of my mom's life and then ultimately her death. And
Wow.
why that is so top of mind. Again, this isn't a moment where people were celebrating or affirming me, but what those moments contained for me was acceptance. First, for me,
Mhm.
allowing myself to be present with my joy, my grief, my pain, my anger, my relief, all of the different feelings that were wrapped up in my mom's death, but allowing then the loved ones around me, the support I had to share in that presence. So it was beautiful. It wasn't even like anything had to be done when I'm referencing. It was just a state of presence and the kind of emotional impact that
Mhm.
that had, where I allowed myself for the first time
Wow.
to exist with all of me. And then I allowed someone else in to that state of presence, which ultimately, for me, I think one of the major takeaways from your book
Yeah.
is really teaching ourselves how much of a part of the journey of allowing in and receiving love we are, how
Yeah.
much of a part allowing our presence to all of our parts of ourself, even our trauma, our wounding, how much
Yeah.
that is, part of the journey of healing. And ultimately how when we do become an active creator, we can step into, even if it is much like you, I still struggle to
Yes.
receive love and support. I
Yes.
can expand myself in my own presence and allow myself to receive what is possible.
Wow, Nicole, I love that. And I just want to reiterate something, a couple things. One is you had this experience of feeling love in some ways, a significant moment. I don't even know if it's for the first time around the transition of your mom. Is that what you're saying?
Around
It's
that time period, right, where there was a lot of
right.
grief, a lot of pain for me. Mm-hmm.
Right. It's so powerful. I mean, that's exactly what happened to me, which is what I talk about in the book To Be Loved. Like my whole life was in search of, and it's so fascinating to me that in these moments of grief and sorrow, right, the complexity shows up in this way, and you were able to feel it and receive it in a similar way with me. I had no idea about that for you. Like, thank you for sharing that. And another thing I want to say is there is this shift that's happening in our world and culture and society around leaders in our field who are sharing our story now. I don't think that used to happen before, right? We were the experts and they were the clients, right? And I just love the fact that you're all here to kind of share like your own personal experience, because that's the way we relate with each other, right? So thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. And there's nothing more alive for me in life than death in this bizarre way. And you talked about that so beautifully. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it.
Of
And I
course.
think do you have anything else you wanted to say?
No, I thank
Uh,
you for creating, right, the safety and my ability to be able to lean into that aspect. And I do truly believe it was right at a time where I didn't have the energy even to give to someone
yeah.
else or to
Uh,
something else, right? All of these achievements, I quite
yeah.
literally couldn't. And I think that
Yeah.
is why kind of with that wall broken down, I was able to kind of step into the present, because historically what I would have done is just kept myself busy, worried about how other people were experiencing me or if I was being a burden. And quite literally, I didn't have the emotional or energetic bandwidth
Yeah.
because of the grief. So it really was this kind of circumstance of, at like you're beautifully saying, a time where we wouldn't expect it,
Right.
where I was able to kind of embrace that which was always present. And now I continue to work on letting in many more moments, of course, outside of grief, where love and support are there.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. It's so, one of the things that always happens, it used to be shocking for me when I work with clients who have relational trauma histories, and they have this positive moment where maybe they're feeling something good about themselves, they're feeling love, and how scary and frightening it is for them. The next week they come back into a session, they'll be like, it was the worst week of my life. Like this, like the receiving positive, and how complicated it is for so many of us, right? So yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think we're gonna move to Janina next, if that's okay, Janina. It was interesting, David, when we were talking about grief. I'm like, okay, David's here. Yeah, we're gonna be able to talk about that complexity. But I think what we'll do, Janina, if it's okay with you, is to hear a little bit from you and kind of your journey, giving and receiving love or not. So I'd love to hear a little bit from your perspective also.
Well, when I first saw your questions, I immediately thought of the long period of my life where I didn't feel loved. As a child, and the number 12 stood out to me as a time when I felt particularly alienated from. My parents weren't capable of being loving throughout my childhood, but at age 12, I not only were they unavailable, but I also didn't want their love.
Yeah.
And because I was a nerdy kid with Coke bottle glasses and not much social skills, I was very alone in my peer world. And so that stands out as the period where I felt most unloved.
Yeah.
And actually, I feel like my journey since then has been gradually finding more and more love. But like Nicole, what stands out for me was the time right after my partner died, where, first of all, one of the most amazing things about losing her was that I immediately forgave her. I did this bargaining thing where I said, okay, I forgive everything, just come back. Right? I forget all the things that I said were non-negotiable, right? They mean nothing to me anymore. I forgive you for everything you've done, and I apologize for everything I've done.
Yeah.
And it actually helped me to feel closer. So I actually felt the many, many years of being loved by her even more intensely. And then I had the same experience where people reached out to me. There was so much love. I've never felt more loved in my entire life. And I think, yes, I think some of it is that we love many people, but we don't necessarily think to reach out to them. We don't arrive unexpectedly at their front door with flowers. Or I had one of my son's best friends arrived with spicy tofu and chocolate chip cookies, and I burst into tears because that simple gift. It was kind of like food for the grieving. What do you need? You need protein and chocolate chips cookies. And it was an amazing time where I felt like minute to minute, I was either just bathed in love, or I was heartbroken. And then I was bathed in love again, and then I was heartbroken. Very, 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 very powerful but a time that I'll never forget, because it really taught me the power of forgiveness,
Yeah.
which in the moment we think, well, there's no way in hell that I'm ever forgiving this person.
Yeah.
But when it comes from some need of our own, as you write about, it is so powerful.
Mhm.
And I was thinking that really, Frank, your book should be called To Love and Be Loved.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Because so much of it is about the determination you had to love your family
Yes.
and to find love.
Yeah.
And that, to get to the be loved part, you had to keep loving people even when they were not being good to you.
Oh,
And that's hard.
so hard. Yeah, that's so beautiful, Janina. You're absolutely right. It's such a cliche, like love yourself before you can love somebody else. Like people say it so flippantly, but it's so powerful and so potent. The drive for loving another is so connected to our capacity to kind of value and love ourselves. Like it's so powerful. And I want to reiterate something you said and just expand on it a little bit, Janina. Um, there was a moment in life when I was 12 when I didn't want their love, right? Like it's so potent. And I had many years with my family where I didn't want it. Like I wasn't ready for it. I didn't want it, whether or not they offered it, right? There's the receptivity, right? And our openness and willingness, as well as the giving it. So it's really, really complicated. So kind of thank you for bringing that piece up. Like it's really okay when we're in a space that we're not receptive.
Right.
And
Right.
we don't want it. I can't believe you too with this love and loss thing too, right? Here we are, the third person that had like, oh my gosh, Frank, the most love I received was during a loss.
Yeah.
Right? Love and loss, love and loss. Wow. Wow. I also know, Janina, like in the ways that I've known you for how many years has it been since we've known each other?
Since 1995. So that's almost 30 years.
It's almost 30 years of this relationship together, right? And the ways we've both gone through this love and loss together has been so important and so powerful for both of us, I know.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. And our love continues no matter what. The thing that's so beautiful about it is it always actualizes itself every year at the networker conference. Like, Janina and I have this long history, and no matter what, we're always going out to dinner together at the networker conference every year, come hell or high water. It's just like we picked up right where we left off.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely. And so that brings up another good point, is that, when we think to be loved, as children, we're thinking of a fairy tale kind of love of a parent or a romantic partner. And we forget that the love of friends is so powerful.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Well, thank you, Janina. Thank you. We will move on to David and hear a little bit about some of your moments, David. It's okay.
Thank you so much, Frank. And you're going to appear in my story. So not surprising, as a grief specialist, it's going to be a little bit about loss in my childhood. So no surprises there.
Yeah.
When I was back to that 12-year-old, I was 12, and my mother had gotten really sick. And I had this fear, if she dies. And I remember one afternoon, she was in pain and not doing well. And I was so afraid, but also so full of love for her. And I remember crawling into bed with her and putting my arm around her. And she pushed it away. And I was devastated, just devastated. Talk about, you know, like this connection I just was so afraid was leaving, and I got pushed away in that moment. So you can imagine lots of rejection played out throughout the years. And
Yeah.
I was so grateful years later, working in the field of death and grief, to learn when people are in enormous pain, they often don't want to be touched.
Yeah.
And it was that light bulb moment about, oh, that wasn't about me.
Wow.
That was about discomfort in her body.
Wow.
So it was like, oh my gosh, everything healed in that moment, because I knew I had other examples of being loved by her. Then the other story of being loved, my father was had the disease of addiction, and it played out in many ways, but it played out one of the ways in Las Vegas, where he worked for one of the casinos, and he would get his paycheck and promptly lose his paycheck. And it was just a nightmare of constant dealing with his addiction. And back then, when I was growing up in Vegas, it was like there were just a few casinos, and Caesar's Palace was like the big one. And so I remember in my childhood, the addiction, him physically beating me, so many challenges.
Yeah.
And I worked later with an amazing therapist, because my father became this sweet 80-year-old man who was just this old, sweet guy. And I had all these stories of this hideous childhood. And I remember I just didn't want to mention it to him. I didn't want to talk about it. And this amazing therapist said to me, you know, you're not getting even, you're just getting it out. Just find a voice for you. And so, of course, as it plays out, we're in Vegas for a weekend at Caesar's Palace. I'm probably 20 at the time, and I don't know why it hit me there, but I had to tell him what he did and what he did to my childhood. And literally, he walked away, and I'm following him through the slot machines of Caesar's Palace. And finally, I said it all that I wanted to say, and he just stopped and he said to me, I didn't know how to be a father. He said, I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to do it. And I felt his love. I finally felt his love and felt that corrective atmosphere.
Yeah.
And if that wasn't enough, 20 years later, Frank, you and I, maybe some other people here, were at the Trauma and Addiction Conference at Caesar's Palace. And so I'm literally there as a grief and death and talking about trauma and addiction in the same place.
Right.
It was really
Wow.
a corrective experience of how that did not define me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just, you know, the other thing I want to add here, Frank, is, you know, your book is just so meaningful. And I think, especially these days with social media, we all have an illusion that everyone but us has it together. We're the damaged one. We're the one with the secrets. And for someone of your stature, a trauma expert, a psychiatrist, to come out and talk about your wounds and your healing and turn it into ways we can help ourselves, that's an amazing gift in a book. And it's, you have so much courage for doing it. And I applaud you for writing To Be Loved. And I know it's going to help so many people.
Oh, thank you so much, David. Thank you so much. That means a lot. You know, yeah, that means a lot. That's kind of the whole point of writing it, is the impact on people. Every time I hear like, oh my goodness, it's affected me this way. Oh, wow, this is what it made me think of. I was like, okay, that is the point of this. That is the point of this. And, you know, David, you said a couple things. I want to kind of circle around two things. So first, like in all forms of therapist, coach, whatever we are, helping people. Like, and again, I added up 33 years of therapy so far. I'm like, I've been in therapy for a hell of a long time, right? Like, and not that I'm suggesting you have to be in for 33 years in order to heal your trauma. Like, that is not what I'm saying to people. But what I'm struck with is how much each one of you so far has talked about these powerful healing moments in your life, in your relationships with people, right? Like, yes, the therapy is helpful. And yes, the therapy maybe readies us to be able to receive it. I don't really know, but it's really striking around these moments of forgiveness, of love, happen in our relationships, in our life. So I just want to kind of throw that out there, that therapy is helpful. I'm not here to trash it, but boy, all the impactful moments, like as Lori Gottlieb says, happen outside the therapy office in this way, which I think is really true. And David, I didn't know that about that around getting it out. Yeah, I'm not getting back. I'm not getting revenge. I'm getting it out. Or I'm not getting back. I'm getting it out. And I
And
have
finding that voice that I didn't have as a child to say, stop, not okay.
right. And boy, I have to tell you all, I'm in the midst of it right now with my family. Like, I had so many moments of like, this is important this truth is important. I need to tell this story for me, for little Frankie. I need his voice to be heard. And in those childhood ways, like, oh my God, am I going to hurt them? Am I such a horrible person? What a horrible person you are for sharing your story if it's going to impact anybody in a negative way. And so I can tell you, I'm in the midst of that right now, how to hold the balance around my truth, my experience, and having a right to share it. And then how do we differentiate? Like, that's their journey. It's okay. And yeah, it can have impact. David, you said something about differentiating. Like, I was like, wow, how brilliant. And how old were you when you had that awareness with your mom? Like, oh, her pushing me away is about her and not about me. I'm just doing that with my family right now. Like, I really am holding, like, all right, this is my mom's experience and it's her journey. And I feel really bad for her and her pain, but I'm not it's not, that the way kids take responsibility. So thank you for naming those pieces. This is so complicated in so many ways, so many ways. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Frank.
Yeah. Yeah. Sarah, you want to share a little bit about your journey with us if it's okay to say where you actually are? It might be related.
Yeah, it might be hint. Yeah, of course. I'm currently in Serbia, and the relevance of that is going to become obvious in about a second. But I just wanted to say how excited I was about a therapist, a psychiatrist, a mental health professional writing a memoir. There is so much in our training that forces us to separate from humanity. There are so many people putting us on pedestals, and then we dehumanize ourselves by trying to live up to this illusion, which is impossible. And I actually think when we step away from our own humanity, we step away from the humanity of our clients and from the people we're trying to help. And I even had moments, which is like checking my own bias or indoctrination when you wrote things, and I was like, no, he didn't. Did he just say that? But in the best way, because I was like, this is what is needed in this field. This is what I advocate for. And I've never seen someone be quite as brave as you with as many details. And I say that with such awe and admiration because I think it's needed. I think we have created a really unhealthy sort of persona around what it means to be a healer and a helper of people. So thank you for doing that. I think that gives a lot of us space to do the same. So yes, I'm in Serbia. My example is going to be a little different. I feel like I had issues with humanity. It wasn't family. but it was relational. And this is where the Serbia part comes in. So I was born in Bosnia right before the Bosnian War. And then we were refugees and we went to Serbia. And then there was the Kosovo War and the NATO bombings. Those two experiences left me distrusting of people, to say the least. So my trauma was very ingrained in lack of trust and safety. And that followed me for a really long time, probably till my mid-20s. So when you ask like, hey, when did you like not feel loved? Sadly, I went, oh, I don't know if I truly experienced love till I was 24, 25.
Yeah.
And it wasn't so much on the other. It was almost like the sun was shining and I was standing in the shade. Mm-hmm. I wasn't capable of receiving it. And a couple of things happened during the trauma for me. I went into self-protection. There was no self-exploration or self-expression. What that meant is people didn't know who to love. I wasn't showing up as myself. So when they loved versions of me, I still didn't feel loved. Or they would encounter trauma responses from me, which they didn't love. And then I felt rejected again. And I think it was really hard for me to come to the point and go, okay, Sara, you're not going to feel loved until you show yourself. To show yourself, you need to figure out who you are.
Yeah.
The reality was, until I went through this journey of self-loss and figuring out who this person was outside of the trauma, which for the longest time, by the way, I did not think I was traumatized. I remember sitting with my therapist in a session, and I started to develop a panic disorder. This is why I went to a therapist in my mid-20s. I was getting a divorce. My life was falling apart. And she's like, well, has anything happened to you like in your past? And I was like, what? I was like, there was this little war, immigration, parents, divorce. I think like I'm in a really unhealthy relationship. And she was like, this is not normal. And it was strange to have someone reflect that to me, because my family has normalized it. My community has normalized it.
Yeah.
And there was like a rebellious piece of me that was like, I had so much anger towards the perpetrators that made me suffer during the war as a child, that it was almost like, I'm not going to let them have me. They have destroyed lives. They have destroyed my country, whatever I was feeling at that time. I was like, but I'm not going to let them destroy my life. And so I hoped that by pretending they didn't impact me, the impact wouldn't be there.
Got it. Wow.
The impact was very much there. And so I had this like moment of like, I am not showing myself. And then a moment of, but I have nothing to show. And then my unraveling sort of happened. But it was interesting the whole time. I think people tried to love me. And I look back on my exes and I go, you poor soul, you were set up for an impossible task. An impossible task, because I didn't love myself. I didn't know myself. And any love you were giving me wasn't resonating. Wow. And so I think that was a journey of like taking responsibility for not feeling loved. And that's what I had to do. And that meant figuring out my own decisions, how I was going to meet, encounter, create this individual that was the self. And, I went through like the really stereotypical, be the perfect child and adolescence. And I got married young. I was in grad school young. I was a very good student. I was helping my community. And I hated myself and I hated my life. But from the outside, that was what I was meant to be doing. And I got all the pats on the back. And that's what made it even more confusing. And then when I started to piss people off, it was uncomfortable, but I finally felt joy. I finally felt like I was starting to encounter myself, and fitting this mold was no longer the priority. And so I remember my brother, when the question was kind of like the last time or when you felt loved, but I was thinking of my brother 2 months ago. I came back from my book tour and I still have these tendencies to kind of show myself or prove myself through my work. And I was like kind of burnt out, and he calls me up. He's like, how are you doing? I was like, good, looking at future projects. He's like, shouldn't you just be relaxing? I was like, no, but you don't understand, like momentum. I need to be doing things. And then he just stops and he goes, Sara, you realize that I and everyone in the family just loves you. I was like, yeah, why are you saying that? He's like, no. Listen to me. I love you. You don't need to be doing this. And he's like, if there is any piece of you that's like, you're still trying to do something for someone, he's like, maybe for the public you are, but not for us, never for us. And that was such an emotional moment. I was like, thank you. And I felt so incredibly loved because he didn't belittle what I was doing, but it was so irrelevant to him in the best possible way.
Yes.
So this is my rant of, hey, I didn't feel loved, tried to take responsibility for it, pissed some people off. It's been a long journey, and those who I showed myself to now actually have the possibility of loving me, and that's been really cool.
Oh my goodness, there's so much there, Sara. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I want to follow up on a couple of those things because you really hit some really powerful like themes there in a way. First one is like, how could they love? Who are they loving? Like, who are they loving? That I so resonate with that. Like, I remember, you know, in the beginning of the book, like I knew my life started. I knew my life started absolutely wrong when I was 6 years old and my parents sent me to therapy. Like I knew the book would open that way before I even knew I was going to write a book. You're not going to school today, Frankie. Like I just knew that. And I spent 6 years in conversion therapy, learning how to be everything else but myself. You know, I was 32 before I was actually me for even the first time in my life, right? So similar to what you are. So that's right. Who are they loving? Like, who am I? I remember looking at my uncles, be like, Uncle Jerry's doing that. That's what I'm supposed to be. So then I'd act like Uncle Jerry, or so-and-so's doing this. Boys are supposed to play baseball. Okay, I'm playing baseball. So I was so not me, like who's to love? So I love that you say that, like, and that dovetails this, like, take responsibility for our piece around the not being loved. That is so huge. So huge. I'm 61 in 3 days, and I spent 59 years hating my father. Like, honestly, right? So much anger and so much hate. And, you know, my role in that, right? And taking responsibility for my inability to open. That was one of the things that, you know, you referenced just a little early, Sara, like, oh my God, Frank, thank you so much for being an expert. And then like, holy cow, what the hell is he saying? I'm like,
Yeah.
I was at the trauma clinic. I was at the trauma conference last week, and somebody came up to me and said, yeah, so I remember the first time I came in my pants simultaneously. And I was like, oh shit, that's right. I wrote that, didn't I? I was like, Frank, it's up there. You know, most of my patients are going to know more about me than I will know about them. So yeah, I wonder how much, it was interesting how much like we can share now, and it's okay to share. And you know, it's interesting. I don't think I shared too much. Like I had those moments of panic, but the reason I'm sharing it is because I processed it. Like I couldn't share it without processing it. So if you have trouble with my first spontaneous orgasm, like that's up to you. That's not mine anymore, right? And I really do hope people get this. Us and them is done. Like stop the us and them. We are all so similar in that way. So really thank you for kind of naming that stuff. And all we do to get loved. Your brother is like such a godsend in that way, right? In our family, and I talk about this in the book, Michael's like, my husband is like, time for the hot tub. And I'm like, oh, damn. He's like, time for the hot tub, Frank. We're going to the hot tub because we got to talk. Like you're totally dysregulated. You're out in your place, right? And he pulls me back in the way that your brother did, in such a beautiful way. So thank you for your vulnerability and sharing also your journey. So thank you. Yes.
Frank, I'm going to have to say goodbye to you.
Yes.
But I just want to say again, congratulations. Happy book day. This is the book's birthday.
Well, actually, tomorrow's this is the This is the
Oh.
pre-activity for tomorrow is the births book day. Yes, Janina, that's exactly right.
Okay. Happy delivery day.
There you go. I said this, Janina, to Nicole. I said, I am not a woman. I've never given birth to a baby, but this book feels like that. It's the energy and the effort that goes into bringing a book into the world is really enormous. So thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you and I love you.
Love you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye. What, David,
Frank, you're walking into labor tomorrow. Just keep up with your thing. We're walking you hand in hand to the room, but then it's you.
that's exactly right.
It's all you.
And after this call, I'm like, I can receive the love. Like, that's the other thing. It's like, I can receive it. Not 100%, not 100% there, right? But I can receive it a heck of a lot more than I used to be able to. So thank you. I've got a bunch of doulas. I've got a bunch of doulas here in this room, which is so beautiful. So beautiful. All right, Mastin, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Frank. And
Yeah.
as a one of the book doulas, I just want to say before I start, if you haven't already, please go to Amazon.com or local book dealer and grab a copy of To Be Loved, which is the book we're talking about here. It's phenomenal, amazing. And I want to be a champion for that call to action because that's why we're here, is to celebrate you and this incredible book that you've written and the light that you've shined for so many of us on how to be better at being vulnerable and helping people in a professional way. So I love you very much and had to say that. So thank you for having me. I feel I was contemplating what to share here. And as I was contemplating, even my mere presence here is a opportunity for a corrective emotional experience regarding the questions that you asked about, when did I feel loved and when was I not feeling loved? I grew up in a family. My mother broke her back when she was probably 14 riding horses, didn't know about it for about 10 years. And then at about 28 or so, the doctors told her she can't have a child. My father was in Vietnam. He went to Vietnam. His father was in World War II. And of course, the World War II greatest generation, there was such admiration for that generation. So my father went to Vietnam with this pride, similar to how his father went to war. And my father was a medic for 2.5 years on a helicopter in Vietnam. And so the context of me growing up is a mother who had a broken back, who had me, despite what the doctors told her to do, with a father who was really good at taking care of her. And he also had a PhD in biology and was an editor of a peer-reviewed journal. And basically both of their mantras to me was, Mastin's a smart kid, he'll figure it out at 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old. There was a lot of, I came to learn later that's called neglect. But I just thought that I was a smart person that was supposed to figure things out. And he also raised me, both my parents raised me in this very confusing world where we would talk about quantum physics, biology, and then they would send me to church to believe in something, but they didn't go to church. So it was a very confusing situation for me to understand these things. And one particular moment where I really remember not feeling loved, I was about 12 years old. And I just moved back to Kansas and I went to a Christian school. And it was a science class. And the science teacher opened up the book of Genesis. And immediately I was confused. Immediately. I was like, this shouldn't be in a science class in my brain, right? So they go through the whole creation story, day 1, day 2, day 3, etc. Now I know about Darwin at this point. I know about evolution, all these things. I raised my hand and I say, poor Miss Henry. I said, Miss Henry, what about evolution? Context, it's the early 90s in Kansas. Like I didn't understand what I was putting myself into in terms of socioeconomic, political issues. I said, don't you think this book that was written 2,000 years ago, like we didn't understand what lightning was or science or gravity or any of these types of things. Like maybe it's just a metaphor for like evolution and creation and like this long history of how the universe came to be. Because we're not just 10,000 years old. Like we're like billions and billions of years old. And I thought that combination of bringing these two worlds together, people would go, oh, this makes sense. But the opposite happened.
Yeah.
And I got sent to the principal's office. I was made fun of. I was called monkey boy. And I remember being so angry around that, I think of a 12, 13-year-old mark. I remember like being removed from school yelling, aren't you supposed to turn the other cheek? Like at like the student body, you know what I mean? Because it's like, I read this book. Didn't you read this book? Like you're not doing what the book says. So that started a very long conflictual relationship with my knowledge base and fitting in and all these things. And so, and also because my father and mom were always about Masten will figure it out. To this day, my mom still calls me her teacher. versus her son, which is beautiful, but also not what I would prefer. And anyway, so I rejected academia, but loved knowledge. And so
Wow.
here I am, I'm a coach on this panel of therapists, um, again, and it's a repeating pattern of this. And I think that the moment where I felt the most love from him was in my like early 30s. I was blessed to be able to bring him to Vietnam, back to the scene of the crime, basically. And we like plotted out a trip to go back to Vietnam and to go to all these meaningful places for him. And there was one particular town that we went to, and we visited a monk who was a wise old monk. And my father and him had probably a 4-hour conversation. I filmed the whole thing. But there was a moment where my father asked this monk, he was must have been 90, how do I let this war go? And I was like, this is 2016 or something. Like, well, this is a long time ago, this war. And I was like, wow, I've never heard my father say anything like that before. And the monk just kind of paused. He said, look around. It's over out here. Is it over in there?
Mm.
And in that moment, I can feel the emotion now. I was like, it was impossible for him to be close to anybody, because later in that trip, he would share with me letters that he would write before going to Vietnam. He believed in God. He believed in love. He believed in, he was I didn't realize how sensitive he was. And I can't imagine, because, as a medic, that type of PTSD is grief-based. It's all, he focuses on the people he lost, right? Like, and he had to make very hard choices for 2.5 years at 19 years old, very young. And in that moment, I felt such love. And it wasn't my father's love. It was just this like complete contextual shift of like, oh, like this context makes sense.
Yeah.
And I felt love for him, because this is back in the days where it wasn't quite shell shock, but it wasn't PTSD, that's for sure. So they were still blame the veteran kind of narrative at not being strong enough. And it just immediately, everything kind of locked into place. And I was like, oh, that's why that's why I had to figure it out, because he didn't know how to. And all the things that he was holding was, including my mother, including me, I had profound compassion for him. And then if I tie it back into this conversation, being a coach and doing trauma-informed work and valuing evidence-based and having a deep knowledge base and having over 20,000 hours working with people, I've experienced, to say the least, a lot of resistance from the therapeutic field about my existence in a different way.
Yeah.
And our relationship, Frank, has been very, very profound, because we bond over humanity, we bond over experience, we bond over knowledge base. And I'm just grateful for being included here as well, because I think you're such a bridge builder of bringing these two worlds together. And I think one of the things that Sara said that's so true is that I feel like your book is such a beautiful example of appropriate self-disclosure and self-integration, making people better practitioners. So there's more of a human connection. And I also think one of my favorite takeaways from your book in general is I feel like you role model how to break the cycle, which includes coming to terms with internalized perpetrators. I think that that's such a nuanced conversation, but your capacity to bring worlds together and your capacity to see people beyond their title or beyond their how they present, and to connect on a human level, because you lead with it. You lead with that connection. You are not just doing IFS as an example, like you are modeling self energy for us. I think that's just such a beautiful thing. And so I want to thank you for that personally, because it's been such a profound friendship that we've created. And thank you for welcoming me into this space, because it's a massive disconfirming experience, because back when I was 12 or 13 in these two different worlds of religion and science, and kind of being sort of exiled for that in a way, even though the observation was likely accurate. This has been a very corrective experience in bringing these two worlds together based on knowledge base and humanity, not based on titles. So I just want to thank you for that. And so, yeah, I'm not sure if those are all the answers to the questions, but that's what presented for me as I contemplated it.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And a couple things you're saying, Mastin, which is really important from my perspective around, like, if we're ever gonna actually heal the world, which I think we're all here to do that. I think in all our different ways, we are healers. We show up in this collective around healing. That issue of forgiveness is a big one. And I want to ask, before we close, each one of you, the forgiveness, the F, I'm now calling it the F word, because it's such a volatile word in the psychotherapeutic community. Like it's so rooted in complexity, right? So there's one piece around the F word, the forgiveness word, but also the perpetrator world. Like, I don't know what comes over me, but like I writing about cheating on my wife, writing about yelling and screaming at my kids, writing about all the things that I did. I kept hearing unity when I was writing this book. It's one of the things that kept showing up for me. And I was like, damn, unity's hard. Like, does it have to be unity? Like, can't we stay in our othering? Like, can't we stay in our othering? And I just kept hearing, no, unity. And I think it's so difficult and challenging for all of us, because if we're really gonna love the other, like, we have to learn how to forgive ourselves, right? And so it's so much more complicated to love the other side, because it does make us look at ourselves, because we can't do it in one side or the other. The world is so much simpler in the other. So thank you for kind of bringing that up. And I do want to be a bridge.
Hey,
And
Frank, real quick.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Say one thing. I just happened to look on Amazon because I'm a multitasker. And I just want to say, and people besides Amazon, wonderful independent bookstores out there, this book is now #1 new release in post-traumatic stress disorder.
Really?
There you go, Frank. Did you ever think you would be #1 in post-traumatic stress disorder? There you are, Frank. I'll put the link in the chat, but
Beautiful.
go to any store you want.
Thank you. I knew I was a #1 trauma survivor. That I knew, but not in. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for saying that. That's great. Wow. That's awesome. Thank you. Wow. Yeah. Well, if this is going to get out there, it's to help people in that way. So that's such a beautiful thing. Thank you, David.
Yeah, because that means it's resonating.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's resonating. It's touching people.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So does anybody, before we close, we have a couple minutes left. We have like 5 minutes left. Anyone want to speak to the othering, the perpetrator, and or the forgiveness issue? Because I kind of feel like it's, people talk about post-traumatic growth all the time. I kind of like, this is post-healing growth, is the way I think about this issue of forgiveness, because it's such a complicated thing. So I don't know if anybody wants to jump in a little bit and share this topic of forgiveness, because this is what I learned by writing this memoir, honestly, was love and forgiveness. So open to hearing. Anybody want to share?
I can just speak really quickly.
Yeah.
I think one of the most powerful aspects continues to be of my own journey is seeing all of the moments where, from my own protective pain, usually, that I can, kind of embody what we could call a perpetrator role, or kind of so focused on my own survival that I'm, disconnecting from people that I don't want to be disconnected from, or I'm saying and doing things that I don't mean, that are, again, from that protective place. And that connection for me to my own humanity in those moments, of course, not, kind of forgiving myself to the extent of understanding where they come from, but though, of course, and taking accountability. And that has only allowed me then to expand that same process of forgiveness to others, ultimately, again, allowing them to take responsibility or accountability, but by no means ensuring that our relationship looks exactly the same on the other side of it. But just speaking to the experience of how, for me, it really came through those really hard moments of looking myself in the face and saying, Nicole, you are acting in a way that is dehumanizing even those around you that you want to show up in loving support of. And again, that allowed me to then extend that same branch of forgiveness, of compassion, and of understanding and empathy almost to others.
Nicole, that's beautiful. Could you say, like, confused is not the right word, the order. Like, did you forgive yourself first and then did that enable you to forgive others? Or did you forgive others that enabled you to forgive yourself? Which way did it go for you?
I appreciate you clarifying, because for a long time, I almost prided myself on thinking I was forgiving everyone by understanding the pain that they were coming through that caused them to do the hurtful thing to me.
Yeah.
But what I realized is I was overstepping kind of the emotional reaction and response, the reality, almost the emotional reality of what it was. So for me, it was kind of allowing myself to be present to not only my own pain, that which I wanted to forgive in terms of my behaviors, but someone else. So it really originated with stopping kind of giving what I thought was surface forgiveness to someone else, pulling it back, and then really understanding what forgiveness actually took, allowing myself to gift myself with that presence to be with what I was feeling first.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. Anyone else?
There's one thing. Oh, go ahead, Sarah. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
No, oh, please.
Oh, okay. I think for me, I had a hard time forgiving until I realized what it was. I assumed the forgiving would be like getting a blank canvas. And that's just not it. And I think a lot of my development was I study like the sense of self, realizing that the sense of self is not static. And so you're not going to just replace canvases. All you're going to do is, let's say you painted the wrong color, you did the wrong stroke, you get to add more. You don't really get to undo it, but you get to create something beautiful out of it. And for me, this connection of like the perpetual becoming and instead of the static self was really connected in the ability to forgive, because I was trying to be static and forgive and kind of undo myself, or it was, I don't even know how to explain it. It was just so unrealistic that it was only when I got a glimpse of like what it means to actually be human and exist and the perpetual becoming that I was able to shift forgiveness to something more realistic, more tangible, and more playful. I can even maybe say that, more fun and more beneficial. So that was just kind of the connection I made.
Love that. That's such an ongoing process, an evolution, not back to what was pre and not stagnant in the moment, done. Let's ongoing. Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful.
I love that. Yeah, I think I'll add to that is, that reminds me of Joseph Campbell quote, we are beings becoming. I love that so much, Sarah. So I think, especially growing up in Kansas, much like your therapy journey, Frank, I think forgiveness has a similar there's a similar quality to it. I think the beginning of your therapy journey was imposed by expectations on the outside based on intention of shame and something's wrong with you. And then later in life, you had an internal drive to seek therapy for your own completion and also to be of service to other people. That was a main drive for you. And I think forgiveness is there's a very similar arc, because I think it's really easy, especially in religious cultures, to feel obligated to forgive, especially someone who's hurting you, without any need for them to have any behavior change. And so I really feel like forgiveness is behavioral, and it's very different when forgiveness comes from the inside because of the result of an individuation or differentiation process, rather than being imposed by the outside as a way to fit into cultural values. And I don't think that forgiveness is necessary for trauma healing necessarily, but I think for growth, I think it's a very important thing because it brings you into present time. And so I think that just like when you decided to do therapy for yourself, for your own journey to be of service to others, I think forgiveness in that same context is probably very powerful. But if it's imposed because of rules, expectations, or outside values, it can just be more trauma. And so I think that internal drive to forgive for your own healing and to be of service to others is probably a very important intention. And to make sure it manifests with behavior change.
100%. All right. Thank you, everyone. I know there was a lot of things in the comments about Audible. So yes. I did sit in the studio and read the book, which was a whole powerful experience. I was like, oh my goodness, I was there for every feeling. I was there for every word. So it was so incredible to read the book and share it in that way. So yes, Audible, I think it comes out on June 4th. So we'll announce that. Audible, you can pre-order now on Audible. Thank you all really from the bottom of my heart. I feel so full. I feel so grateful and love you all. Really. Thank you for being here and being a part of this journey with me. And I know our relationships will continue to evolve as they do. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Love you, Frank.
Thank you.
David, you're on mute.
Always on mute. Thank you, Frank. It's an amazing book. I hope people go out and
Yes.
really order it today. It's really incredible. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.